Bright Duty. Every student matters.
Hello dear students, welcome to another lecture. So far we have been reading the diary of a young girl, Anne Frank. We've read about the dilemmas, the problems, the circumstances that these people were surrounded with in the middle of World War II. Living in secret annex was no joke. They were almost 8 people living under one roof, and when you live together, there are always drifts and conflicts that arise. Now, in the last video, we had read about the feelings of Anne Frank that were changing. So, the changing feelings of Anne Frank for Peter and the other way round. So today we are going to begin with the 5th of April 1944. Let's see what she has to write for that day. So for a long time I wondered why I was bothering to do any schoolwork. The end of the war still seemed so far away. I had decided that if the war was not over by September, I would not go back to school, since I don't want to be 2 years behind. Only Peter filled my days. My dreams and thoughts were full of Peter until Saturday night when I felt miserable. So for a long time she was wondering, so she was thinking why I was bothering to do any homework. So she was, she did not want to do any homework. She did not feel like working on anything related to her school. So she did not wish to get involved with any schoolwork. Now the end of the war was something which seemed very far away. Anytime in the future, they did not know when the war would end. Anne Frank tells us that I had decided that if the war was not over by September, so this is what she had decided for herself, that if the war would not have been over by September, she would not go back to school. So why wouldn't she go back to school if the war continues post-September? Because she does not want to be 2 years behind. So if the war would have continued post-September, that means if she would join her school in the next term, that would mean that she was 2 years behind the other students. So that means, if she joined the class or the school back in grade 7, she should originally have been in grade 9. So that is why she decided that she'd not join the school back if the war continues post-September. She again tells us about how Peter constituted an important part in her life. She tells us that her dreams, her thoughts, everything was full of Peter. So she was always thinking about, dreaming about Peter. Until Saturday night when something happened which made her feel miserable. Miserable, very bad. She was in a pathetic state. There was something that made her feel bad. I sat on the floor in my nightgown and said my prayers. Then I lay down on the floor and cried. I tried to pull myself together and fought against it. Just before 10:30, I climbed back into bed. It was finally over. I finally realized that I must do my schoolwork to keep from being ignorant and to become a journalist. That's what I want. So what happened on Saturday night? She was sitting down on the floor in her nightgown. So she was, praying the night prayer. So she was speaking her night prayers. She was sitting on the floor in her nightgowns, and then she suddenly, after she had spoken her prayer, she just lied down on the floor and she started crying. Now she tried to pull herself together. To pull yourself together means to control yourself, to have a control over your emotions. So she tried to do that. She fought against whatever feelings were going on in her mind and in her heart, which made her feel so sad and which were the reason for her crying. Just before 10:30, so it wasn't 10:30, before 10:30 p.m., she climbed back on the bed and it was finally over. What was finally over? She finally composed herself and she stopped crying. She finally realized that it was very important for her to do homework, for her to do her schoolwork rather, because if she would not do that, she'd become very ignorant. One who is not educated, one who is not informed about all the things, they are very ignorant towards the environment, to the surroundings. Why? Because they don't have the proper knowledge. So she did not want to become ignorant. Plus, she wanted to be a journalist. So she decided that she is going to go back to her schoolwork, and that is what she wanted, to be a journalist. So she had to study to be a journalist. I know I can write. A few of my stories are good. My descriptions of the secret annex are humorous, and much of my diary is alive. But I still don't know whether I have a true talent or not. Even if I don't have the talent to write books or newspaper articles, I can always write for myself. But I want to achieve more than that. I can't imagine living like Mother, Mrs. Van Daan, and all the women who do their everyday work and then are forgotten. I need to have something more than a husband and children in life. So she's told us about how and where she sees herself when she grows up. She writes that she was confident she can write well. How? Because a few of her stories and the way she has described the secret annex, they were humorous, they were very funny. Indeed, they were. There was so much fun reading about, how she had described the people and the secret annex. And her diary is very much alive. When you are reading that diary, I am sure when you are reading that with me, you all can very well visualize yourself being a part of it. Okay, it dwells into your imagination. So yes, her diary is very well alive. But she was still not sure whether she had the true talent of being a journalist or not. She says that even if I don't have the talent to write a newspaper or to write books, but I know I can at least write for myself. Okay. What she wanted was to achieve more than that. So she just was very, aspiring young girl who wanted to achieve something in life. She clears it that she did not want to live like her mother, like Mrs. Van Daan, and all the women who just engage themselves in the household work and then they are forgotten by people. Nobody remembers them. She wants to do something. She wants a life which is far beyond a husband and children. So yes, she wanted a family, but she wanted an identity for herself. This is what she meant. I want to make something of myself. I want to be useful and bring enjoyment to all people, even those I've never met. I want to go on living even after my death. I'm grateful to God for my ability to write, and I'm determined to at least try. So she says that she wants to make something of herself. That means she wants to be known by people. She wants not to be famous, but she wants people to know her and her writings. She wants to be useful. She wants to help people. She wants to add some fun, laughter, enjoyment in the life of people. even the people whom she does not know or whom she has not met. She wants to go on living even after she dies. So she wants to be remembered, as I told you, even after she dies. She says that I am grateful to God. Grateful, thankful. She was very thankful to God for this ability to write, and she had the determination, she had the courage, she had the willpower to try her hand in writing. Tuesday, the 11th of April, she writes, "So much has happened, I really don't know where to begin. At 9:30, Peter knocked and asked father to come upstairs and help him with a difficult English sentence. That sounds fishy, I said to Margaret. You could tell by the way the men were talking that there had been a break in. I was right. The warehouse was being broken into at that very moment. Father, Mr. Van Daan, and Peter went downstairs. Margaret, mother, Mrs. Van Daan, and I waited. 4 frightened women need to talk, so that's what we did until we heard a loud noise from downstairs. After that, all was quiet. The clock struck 9:45, but the men still had not come back. So on the 11th of April, something happened, and she says that I don't know where to begin from. So at 9:30, Peter knocked the door of their rooms and he asked Anne Frank's father to come upstairs and help him with something related to the English language. Now, Anne Frank, when she saw this and when she heard this, she said to her sister Margaret that I feel something is fishy, something is not wrong. She says that, just by looking at the way the men are talking, you can make out that, there's something wrong. And the way Peter and her father were talking to each other, they could sense that there had been a break in. Somebody had come inside that building. Somebody had broke into that building. And she was right. The warehouse, the building's warehouse, the building in which they were hiding. So the storeroom, the storehouse of that building was being broken into at that very moment. So when they were talking, somebody was trying to get inside the warehouse. Father, Mr. Van Daan, and Peter, they went downstairs. Margaret, mother, Mrs. Van Daan, and Anne herself, they simply waited. Now she says that we were 4 women who were very frightened. We were very scared. And when 4 scared women sit together, they talk. And that is exactly what we did. But then we heard a loud noise from downstairs. So there was a lot of noise coming from downstairs. And after that, everything was quiet. The clock struck 9:45. So it was almost 10:15. It had been almost 45 minutes since the men had gone downstairs and they had not returned back. We waited, calm but terribly afraid. Finally at 10:45, so it was 15 minutes, all right. Finally at 10, the men came in, nervous and pale. Lights out, we are expecting the police. They told us what had happened as we hid in the dark. Burglars had broken into the warehouse downstairs, and on seeing them, Mr. Van Daan yelled police. The burglars fled. Our men tried to put the warehouse door back up, but not before someone shone a light from the outside through the gap. Most probably the people with the flashlight had alerted the police. So all 4 of our men raced upstairs, and now we all waited in the dark for the police to come. So it was very unfortunate. They were there, they were waiting for the men to return back calmly, but they were obviously terribly afraid. They were very, very scared. At 10 o'clock, when when all the four men came upstairs, they were nervous, they were very, very tensed, and they were pale. So their faces had turned yellow. They announced to the woman that they need to put all the lights out. So there has to be complete darkness in the secret annex because police was expected. Now, what had happened was that burglars, the thieves, had broken in. They had come into the warehouse when these four men from the secret annex, Mr. Van Daan, Peter, Anne Frank's father, and the dentist who lived with them. So, when these four men had seen the burglars, Mr. Van Daan yelled, he screamed, "Police!" So, the moment he screamed police, the burglars, they fled away from there. They ran away from the warehouse. Now, the burglars had run away. The men tried to close the door of the warehouse so that nobody enters again. But there was a gap through the door, and somebody who was outside, the building shone a light. Somebody with a flashlight had shown the light inside the warehouse from that gap. It was assumed that the person or the people who had that flashlight in their hands, they had seen that the robbers had broken into the warehouse and probably had informed the police about the same. So now all the four men came upstairs, lights were out, and they were expecting and waiting for the police to come. At 11, we heard footsteps on the staircase. The fear was indescribable. "Now we are done for," I said. I had visions of all 8 of us being dragged away by the police that very night. There was more rattling at the bookcase. Then at last we heard the footsteps recede. We were out of danger so far. A shiver went through everyone's body. No one said a word. We had to stay quiet all night. We tried to sleep on the floor, but everyone was worried. So what happened? Obviously, they were waiting for the police to come, and the police finally came at 11. They could hear footsteps on the staircase. They could hear a lot of people climbing up the staircase. That fear, when they could listen to all those, all that noise, that was indescribable. Anne Frank says she cannot even describe how they were feeling at that time. She thought that they were done, that, she had that vision. She was imagining that all 8 people living in the secret annex are going to be dragged away by the police. Dragged away forcefully, the police is going to take them away that very night. Now, after that, there was more rattling at the bookcase. Rattling, the sound when somebody moves something very strongly, very violently. So they could hear rattling at the bookcase. And then at last, they heard that the footsteps receded. They went back. So whosoever had climbed up the stairs had gone back as well. So far, they were out of danger. But because of that incident, a shiver went through everybody's body. They were all shivering. They were all trembling with fear. And none of them could utter a word. They stayed quiet the entire night because they were still in danger. They tried to sleep on the floor, but everyone was so worried that they could not sleep. "We should hide the radio," moaned Mrs. Van Daan. Moaned, cried. So Mrs. Van Daan, now this word moaned is used to talk about, the feelings of somebody who is in pain. So when you are in pain and you're trying to speak, that is the moaning sound. So obviously they all were in pain. They all were terribly scared and afraid. So Mrs. Van Daan said that we should hide the radio. If they find us, what does it matter if they find the radio as well? Answered Mr. Van Daan. So Mr. Van Daan said that why should we hide the radio? If we are being caught and if they find the radio, how does it affect? Once we are caught, things are going to come to an end in any case. They'll also find Anne's diary, added father. So father said that not only are they going to get us, but they will also find Anne's diary. So burn it, somebody suggested. No, not my diary. If my diary goes, I go too. But thank goodness, nothing more was said about this. So Anne Frank was very adamant about it. She said that nobody is going to touch my diary, because if my diary goes, if something happens to my diary, I will also go. But thank God, nobody mentioned her diary thereafter. Next morning, we rang Mr. Coupuis and Jeanne and Meep arrived. They went off again to the police to inform them about the burglars. The house was an awful mess, so we cleaned up the place. So obviously, the next morning, they had to inform Mr. Coupuis, Jeanne and Meep, and they all arrived. They went to the police to inform them about the break-in, that happened the last night. The burglars, they had come to the house, and the house was an awful mess. So it was all so dirty that all the 8 members of the secret annex had to clean up. None of us has ever been in such danger as we were that night. So that night was actually very awful for them, and she says that this much danger they had never experienced before. God was truly watching over us. Just think, the police were right at the bookcase and still no one had discovered our hiding place. We've been saved. Keep on saving us. That's all we can pray for. She says that we are sure that God is watching over us, that God was protecting them, because the situation was so bad that the police had come till the bookcase. But behind the bookcase was their hiding place, and the police did not discover that. So she just thanked God for having protected them, for having saved them, and she prayed to God to continue to do the same. This incident has brought about a whole lot of changes. Peter will be patrolling the house between 8:30 and 9:30. He isn't allowed to open his window anymore since someone noticed it was open. We can no longer flush the toilet after 9:30 at night. The incident has also reminded us that we are Jews. We must live like prisoners. We must put our feelings aside and be brave. One day this terrible war will be over. The time will come when we'll be people again and not just Jews. Now, Anne Frank says that after this incident, a lot of changes have come over in the way we lived inside the annex. The first thing was that Peter was given the duty of patrolling the house between 8:30 to 9:30. Patrolling, just like you people must have seen, the police van, the police men, they patrol the streets. So they take a round on the streets at night, just to be sure that there is nothing wrong, there is nothing suspicious happening anywhere. So similarly, Peter was supposed to do the same between 8:30 to 9:30 to ensure that everything was fine. He was told that he cannot open the window of his room anymore, because somebody had noticed, when Mr. Coupuis, Meep and Jan, they had gone to the police reporting the incident, they got to know that somebody had noticed that the window was open. So he was told to shut that. Now, they were not allowed to flush the toilet after 9:30 at night, and this incident reminded them that they were Jews. Why does she say that? Remember, it was at the beginning only when we had read that because they were Jews, there were a lot of restrictions which were imposed on them. Not leaving their house after 8, wearing those, on their clothes they need to have that star, and the kids could only go to the Jewish schools, and so on and so forth. So now there were so many restrictions on them back again that they remembered that they were Jews. and that they were supposed to live like prisoners once again. They had to put aside their feelings, their emotions, and they had to be very brave and fight in this situation. She just hoped and just hoped that one day this terrible war will come to an end. There will be a time when these people, that is Anne Frank, her family, Mr. Van Daan, everybody in the secret annex, they would feel like people. Not only them, all the Jews rather. She was just hoping that a day should come when these people should also be treated like people and not be given a separate tag of being Jews. Who has made us suffer like this? Who has set apart from the rest of the world? God has made us the way we are, but it's also God who will lift us up again. If after all this suffering there are still Jews left, the Jewish people will be held up as an example of goodness. Who knows, maybe our religion will teach the world and all the people in it about goodness. And that's the reason we have to suffer. We can never be just Dutch or just English. We will always be Jews as well. So Anne Frank once again is expressing her faith in God. So she first asks the question that who has made us suffer like this? Whatever is going on in our lives, our destiny is decided by God. So she says that who has put so much suffering in our lives? Who has made us different from the rest of the world? And she says that if God has made us the way we are, if whatever is happening to us is because of what God has done, then I am sure that God will only lift us up again. So He is going to help us come out of this adverse situation. She says that if after all this suffering, all the problems that we are going through, if after the World War the Jews still survive, then Jewish people are going to be an example of goodness. She says that, maybe this religion and we people were made so that we can teach the people the importance of being good, the importance of goodness, and that is the reason why we are suffering so much. We are suffering so that we can set an example for the others, so that people can learn from us. She says that we can never be just Dutch or English. We will be Jews as well. So if they live in Britain, they'll be English and Jews, Dutch and Jews. So they can never be just one people known by one name. They will always have the tag of being Jews. Be brave. There will be a way out. God has never left our people. Throughout history, Jews have had to suffer, but this suffering has made us stronger. That night, I really thought I was going to die. I was ready to die like a soldier. But now that I am alive, I want to stay in this country even after the war. I love the Dutch, I love this country. I love the language and I want to work here. If God lets me live, I'll achieve more than Mother ever did. I'll make my voice heard, I'll go out into the world and work for mankind. Anne Frank again says that be brave. She was talking to herself. She was motivating herself to be brave. And she said that there'll surely be a way out. There is going to be a solution to it for sure. She was sure, she knew that God has always been with the people, with the Jews. So God has always, protected them. And throughout the history, Jews have suffered a lot. And because of the suffering, they have become even stronger. That night, Anne Frank thought that she was going to die. And she was ready to die like a soldier because she knows she is brave. She knows she's been through a lot of things and has faced all the problems on the face. But now that she was alive, She has almost a near to death experience, but now that she was alive, she wanted to be alive. She wanted to live even after the war would get over. She loves the Dutch, she loves this country, she loves the language of the people, and she wants to work here. She says that if God lets me live after the war comes to an end, I will achieve more than mother ever did. So she just did not want to, continue to be for the family and not being known by anybody else. She wanted her voice to be heard. She wanted people to know her. She wanted to go out in the world and to work for the mankind. She wanted to help people. So this is what we get to know about this young girl, Anne Frank. So I'll see you all now in my next video.